Welcome to another episode of the Diabuddy Dialogue, a podcast brought to you by the Diabetes Hope Foundation EDI Committee. I'm Aastha, and my co-host Afreen and I will be exploring the flip side of type 1 diabetes, or T1D, today.
That's right. When we say flip side, we're talking about the parts of T1D that are not always visible. That could include family dynamics, cultural beliefs and baggage, moments of stigma, but also the unexpected strength, the connections, and growth that can come from it all.
Our guest today knows the flip side all too well, and to help us unpack, we're joined by Tasfia Rayhan, a fifth-year undergrad at the University of Toronto, double majoring in public policy and population health.
Tasfia was diagnosed with T1D at just 2.5 years old, so she's bringing nearly 2 decades of experience. She loves picking up new languages and curling up with her cats for a well deserved nap. We're so excited to have her with us. Welcome, Tasfia.
Yay. Thanks, guys. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so let's get started. Maybe with your diabetes journey. I know you were diagnosed so young, as Afreen just mentioned. So, what has that sort of evolution looked like for you?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed at you guys had mentioned at 2.5 years old. And so yeah, it's almost been like 20 years, so lots of experience. When I was diagnosed and growing up, I really didn't understand much about T1D. I'd say my family really did the heavy lifting, especially my mom. I was started on the pump at around 6 years old, and I will say my mom trialed that for me as well. As someone without T1D is really interesting, I guess, for her, but also really helpful for me growing up to have that support. Um, I'd say growing up, once I got into school, I did have some experiences with, I guess, stigma around diabetes and T1D, especially perpetuating kind of the narrative that, oh, is diabetes contagious? Or experiences like that, because, we were like 6, 7, 8 years old. So there was experiences where, like, girls would say that, oh, I don't know if I want you to touch my color pencils or stuff like that. So there wasn't really a lot of education on diabetes in general, much less the differences between type 1, type 2, so many more types nowadays. So I will say I had to kind of navigate that. But I also will say that I was almost blissfully kind of, you know, not ignorant, but like I had the confidence from my family and from, I guess, my endo and pump team to kind of be like, you know what, it's fine. They just don't know. Because it was really kind of drilled into me that, you're such a brave girl. People around me be like, oh my gosh, that's such a challenge you're overcoming. And, you're so great in these ways. So I kind of like almost had an inflated sense of confidence. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so amazing. I have diabetes and doing well and all of that. I did like a presentation in first grade on my pump as well. So I'd say it was definitely a learning curve kind of coming into like the burdens of diabetes or the responsibilities. But my childhood was still, I guess, like you mentioned, kind of flip side. There was the good and bad as well. Yeah.
About confidence, you are expressing the perfect amount of confidence because I feel like that's a really hard thing to do as a kid. So that's so amazing you were able to do that.
For sure. No, and like I said, I really appreciate how like supportive my pump team and like my endo and my nurse and then my family, I guess. Because when you are diagnosed that young, especially my parents immigrated to Canada around the same time. And so it's so hard to kind of navigate that. You have like a 2.5-year-old daughter that has, in my family as well, there weren't many other people with type 1 diabetes. So it was such a new thing. But I really appreciate how they were my backbone. And then growing up as well, I got to kind of grow up with that confidence, like you said. And then, I hope I'm able to spread it to other people now. But I know that's not the case for a lot of people. So, like you said, I'm always trying to be grateful and then kind of remember where things started. Yeah.
And like in terms of like your evolution of, handling T1D, Like, how do you think that connects to like your South Asian background? Or for example, like when you're talking about how your family was very supportive of your T1D and gave you so much confidence, like, do you think you could like further explain what that was like and how they were able to support you?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think for just to go into a little bit more detail, I guess when I was first diagnosed, obviously I don't remember, but my dad, he was caught really off guard. And I remember my mom just telling me that he was almost just like depressed at first. He was super in shock. He was like, how did this happen? You know, especially when you're in a new country, you're dealing with so many new things. My dad's mom, my grandma, my father's side, obviously, but she had type 2 diabetes. But that's pretty much it. And so he was like, is this my fault? Or, you know, what happened? Lots of that kind of mentality. And I guess that relates to his culture as well in South Asian, you know, beliefs and values of like, um, what did you do? Or is it your fault? Or, once again, is it contagious? What do I do now? Where do I go? So that was really hard for him. My mom was really the rock for him and for me for a long time. I guess like in terms of other aspects of culture as well, I really do lean on my family. I feel like that's going to come up a lot today, but my grandparents, my uncles and aunts, they were always, and I feel like my mom kind of influenced them that way as well, the language used, but it was always very, you can do anything, even with diabetes. It's just another kind of aspect to yourself. It doesn't really matter as much, you just gotta keep your chin up and all of that. So even within like my kind of view of my culture from a young age was my family. They live in Bangladesh and London and whatnot, and from all parts of the world. It was always not a Zoom call, but a Skype call, telling me that, oh my gosh, okay, how are your sugars? Or, how are you doing today? And like, oh my gosh, you're doing so well, and how are your A1Cs? So it was normalized within my family, but then externally, growing up, I will say I did not have that much. I didn't have any friends that had type 1 diabetes. I might have known like one other kid that was maybe like 2 or 3 years younger than me, but definitely not a lot of, external support. I couldn't really talk to anyone. I had to give my own presentations, talk to my teachers about it, kind of navigate having, I had a fanny pack with my low snacks and whatnot. And my mom was so proud. I remember this was maybe in like kindergarten or first grade as well, where we had an assembly and we were performing and something like that, and I had to figure out where to put my fanny pack, and I told her, I was like, Mom, I put it behind me so I could still reach it, but it wasn't bothering me. And she was like, I'm so proud. My daughter is growing up and she can like handle these things as well. So it was a long time of, figuring out how to do things for myself while playing on that strength. And I'd say that, like, just to kind of connect DHF into it as well, I first kind of got that community and heard other people using that same language when I got my scholarship in 2021. So that was also, I guess, just another addition to my toolkit, my belt. So I guess that has helped me kind of normalize my experiences now, because I definitely will say that it's so much different being like a young adult with diabetes than it is being a kid and not knowing much. You really have to make it your own. So I'd say that is kind of the dichotomy there. Another thing I will add that kind of changed my relationship with diabetes, or like, was part of that evolutionary journey, was my mom's diagnosis. She was actually diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 10 years after I was, so in her mid 30s. And it wasn't a shock for me, because even at that point, I think that she was still helping me with my appointments, with my readings, and so she didn't really. She's just that type of person, and I think being a brown mom, she also didn't let us understand, what was going on. So she first, when she first had her low, at that point, she was like, "Oh my goodness," and she was in tears. And she told me later, she's like, "I felt so bad because the first thing apparently that I said to her was, now you can understand how I feel exactly." And I didn't think much of it. Of course, I was like 10 years old. But my mom was kind of very shook, and she's like, "Okay, so this is actually how my daughter feels." So I'd say that changed my relationship with my mom with diabetes, and how like I from then on kind of took my experiences and helped her out. And now obviously we kind of like compete with our blood sugars, and it's just a completely different, I think, aspect to our relationship.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. You had talked about how this podcast may bring up family a lot, but family plays such a big role in our experience with diabetes and your like experience with your mom's diagnosis. Like, how does that affect your relationship with your mom? Like, I am imagining my mom having diabetes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what would that look like? What does that feel like?
For sure. Well, I mentioned a bit briefly. I'll talk about some of the interesting parts first. We compete with our blood sugars. So especially like if we've eaten out, or if been a long day and we haven't been able to check up on each other, we ask, how's your blood sugar? And it's like it's almost a jinx moment, or like a very like comical moment when hers is like 8.3 and mine is 8.4, or when we get the exact same BG and it's just like, oh my goodness, what did you do? Like, how much did you bolus? What is your basal? So it's those moments that it's just like, okay, it's more like two besties kind of talking with T1D. I'd also say there's obviously more of an emotional side to it as well with support. Um, all my life pretty much. My mom was the one who child the pump, who figured out my basals, who had her huge book of carbohydrates and nutrition facts and what to do when Tasfia's BG is this, or how much she's eating and stuff like that. And I will say it's been a lot for her. So now that we're both getting older, I will say I can help her out a bit more. One thing that's funny is she always gets carb ratios mixed up. So it's like if you lessen how much your ratio is, are you taking more insulin or less? And so she'll call me and she'll be like, Tasfia, what do I do? Am I taking more insulin? Am I taking less? Or, reaching out to the nurse or our endo, and we'll do the same because we share nurses, and so we'll be able to communicate for each other, advocate for each other. A part that was hard, I'd say, was when she took me to an appointment to meet her endocrinologist for an A1C check, and he had kind of outright told her that, oh yeah, you gave your daughter T1D. My mom was like absolutely distraught. So yeah,
Wow, that is terrible. It's really hard to hear things like that when it's coming from a healthcare provider, so I can't even imagine what that felt like. Wow.
exactly. It was definitely hard for my mom. I was really upset at the doctor. Because over the years, obviously, you get to be protective, especially for daughters, I think. In kind of South Asian families, you get to be protective of your mom a lot. You want to, protect her feelings and how much work she's done for you and how much she sacrificed. And it was very much like, how could you say that? When there's so many like mechanisms and triggers to diabetes. And so she was really upset for a couple of days, and I had to just, you know, convince her and tell her that, you know what, like you can't really control any of this. You can't, predict what's going to happen. You can't like and who's to say that, without diabetes my life would have turned out like so much better. I guess that's a flip side that I try to often kind of reflect upon. And so it's he basically said that, oh, it was always, in your body when you moved to Canada, or certain environmental triggers that kind of triggered it. But I'm a big believer of fate, and so I was just like, you know what, if it's meant to be, it happened, it is. And it's not like you haven't done anything at all to support me. So it was definitely like a experience for us both where we were like, okay, we have to kind of navigate these tiny nuances in our relationship where we might get a bit like hurt at each other or like hurt because of something else someone said, or how we play a role in each other's lives plus T1D. So I feel like that's a couple aspects of my mom and I's relationship with T1D bonus. Yeah.
That part
Wow.
about fate that you mentioned really struck me because you're right that maybe it is diabetes, delivered by fate, but it's almost like you chose the resilience and you chose the strength that you've really kind of showed us through just even this part of the conversation so far. I think that the baggage that you kind of described carrying, whether it was, someone else's belief or in your family, different perspectives. I'm wondering, really diving deeper into the South Asian aspect of it. I'm also South Asian, and
Mhm.
I know that in our community, diabetes can carry a lot of that stigma around, whether it's food or marriage or even just being seen like different. So have you had to navigate that sort of cultural stigma in your circles?
For sure. Yeah, it's almost like a where do I start? So within my family, it was a very protective bubble, but growing up, you kind of really have to you do step out of that bubble and you realize things that you didn't realize before. Um, I can empathize a lot with my mom, but something that, she and I can't really, well, I guess we can actually, thinking back on it, is just the growing up and being a young woman who's very much single, and yeah, like with diabetes, in a South Asian community. I remember the other day, this was maybe a month ago, but we met a couple. We had a brown party. I love saying brown party. So it's like basically a get together. And a couple of the aunties were like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even recognize it was Tasfia. You look so good. How are you? Like, what are you studying? All the typical questions and how's university going? And do you, go out with your friends, et cetera, et cetera." And then my mom told me later on that, they were asking about, does she still have diabetes? Or, how is that? Is it cured now? Or how am I doing with it? Like, is it better now? So that kind of language. And it's just like some people to this day, especially I've found, maybe older generations, but also in this community, don't realize still that, it's not like I ate too much sugar and I got diagnosed with T1D, or it's something that can't be cured, the mechanisms behind it. Even though so many people now, I feel like diabetes type 1 and type 2 have become so common, it's still some people look at you and they don't see the diabetes, but when they find out, it's all they can see. So that was somewhat of a reality check where I know completely that they did not have any like bad intentions or I really do look like a very capable, and I am a very capable person, individual, young woman, but it's almost like you had to think about, oh, okay, I've spent a lot of my time kind of subconsciously proving myself with diabetes and maybe other people with the conditions that they have. And it always sometimes feels like, you're kind of running ahead, but there's this like weight pulling you back. And that I feel like a lot of the time is the stigma, is the kind of impressions, is the judgment. Um, it's these like deep rooted kind of values and these ideas. And so that I really felt where I was like, no, I understand logically that, they're giving me a compliment almost that, oh my gosh, she doesn't look like she has diabetes. Or, they're very concerned of like, it's been maybe like 15 years since they've seen me and how am I doing? But it's also, I think, in the sphere of just being hitting 20 and in our community facing those like comments of like even as a joke, I've heard my friends get the comments of, oh, when are you getting your daughter married? Or oh, does she like anyone? Or oh, it's that age now, you better start like finding prospects. And so just like that idea of I know I'm enough and I know that, I don't need a man. And to be honest, I don't want a partner right now. But it's also just like these antis and these judgments where it's just like, are you their first choice, or do you see me as someone equal to someone without diabetes? It's like recently I feel like that has been at the back of my mind. So looping my mom into this, she was diagnosed obviously after she had me, after, like a good decade of our marriage. And I don't know if she can completely understand, but she told me coming home from that kind of get together that, Tasfia, I think you're so much better than any of these people. Um, and you've had so much to prove and so much to kind of overcome, and I think you're doing a really good job of it. And so I really don't want you to have to, feel the brunt of that judgment. I don't want you to go through that. So, like, I hope you build yourself up, and I hope you have that confidence. So it was nice to hear, but it was also, it's that flip side again and again. It's just like, it hurts a bit. It's like a twinge. And then you have to kind of convince yourself. But then you also have your rocks and your people be like, you're good. You're enough. You don't need, to like continuously prove yourself to people who don't get it and who don't want to get it.
Yeah, I totally hear you and I feel your emotions. Like, I know a lot of us in the T1D community can speak about our own experiences with stigma and diabetes. But wow, your mom sounds like one heck of a lady. She sounds so supportive and amazing, and I love that for you. But like hearing your story, it really makes me reflect on how diverse T1D really is. Sometimes we can get stuck in our own circle and think about our own experiences, but like there's so many things about us that are unique, and that changes how everything we see is different based on what we experience. And being able to hear your story is like really inspiring, and it's a really good way to reflect on like how little things in our life can affect us in so many ways. So like always keeping that something in the back of your head, like, oh, be aware of what this person has gone through or what they could have been through that you may not know. So I really love that you brought that up. Um, and like, on kind of like the topic of, this is the flip side. One of the things you have talked about is how your mom has supported you. But like, how do you find the flip side in these tough situations? Like when you are experiencing stigma, whether that be from your family or your friends, or maybe just experiencing barriers in general towards T1D. What is the flip side for you? What are some ways you get through this?
Yeah, for sure. I will say it's there's a lot of things that I've honestly you call like coping mechanisms, I guess. Everyone finds their own, but one thing I will say is that it's not just like you have your external support, but you have to find a way to obviously support yourself when that external support, you won't always get validated by the people you're looking to get validation from. Even, it's such a privilege for me to have my mom and my family be the support and be my backbone and be some people I come back to. But, I feel like people will relate when I say you don't always like get that when people are in different, mind spaces and head spaces, I guess. I have a younger brother, my dad, they've like seen me obviously from a very young age kind of handling this. And I will say that diabetes does get normalized. Like when obviously you've seen this person with diabetes for a long time, you kind of have faith that be able to kind of handle it. So that kind of almost sometimes when people have a lot on their plates, it sometimes can become, if I have a low or if I'm just like really high and I'm just like I want to sleep, or I get a bit like catty and just like, can you leave me alone? It almost is like there's these comments sometimes where it's just like, oh, are you low again? Or did you like bolus too much? Like, so it doesn't always in those moments, I will say, just kind of reframing that you do have to be your best friend. And like you asked about, how do I do that and how do I find the flip side? Just like remembering that everyone's a different person, everyone experiences things differently. Just because I have diabetes and maybe the other person doesn't mean that like everyone or the other person is completely perfect. Like no one is without flaws. So it's just like I kind of remind myself, I'm like, I might be perfect, but then the other person is as well. And if I'm not perfect, then the other person isn't. So, and the latter is true. So, yeah, you really have to have confidence. And when you don't, you're just like, you know what? Everyone has flaws. Forgive my language, sucks sometimes. So, you really have to kind of just pat yourself on the back, kind of, let yourself be sucky for a day and be upset. Um, Diabetes burnout is real. It doesn't get easier always. There are days when you're just like down in the dumps and you can't let other people kind of disvalue or demoralize you and your experiences. So that, I guess, one, just remembering that everyone has flaws, and if it isn't visible, then like that's just what it is. Maybe it's a character flaw. Like I know I'm a decent person. Um, you just have to have faith that other people are trying their best and you are too. I'd say another thing is I mentioned fate in line with that, I guess, faith. Um, in, I guess, I'm Muslim, and in our religion, we kind of believe that like what is meant for you will find you. And if it isn't meant for you, then even if it's like at the tip of your nose, like you won't be able to reach it. Um, so I guess that is what it is. I really do kind of let things go easier because of that. Um, and just, yeah, what I've been given is a blessing in some ways. I know that, people see accommodations or navigating, like, maybe making 180 plus decisions every day, and it's like hard. It is definitely hard, but when you find your people, like I feel like I found mine at DHF, and I'm able to kind of spread that to other people too. You kind of realize that, the right people will understand and they'll see you as a stronger person for it. So I'm not going to be chasing people or opinions or validation that, doesn't really understand, that don't understand me, my experiences, and just the idea that everyone's going through something. If that empathy piece is so important to me. So you don't condemn people for having flaws, you don't condemn people for having conditions. You just deal with it. You see them and you support them and you realize the privileges that you have. Other people don't. And yeah, I feel like I'm rambling, but it's just something that I feel like I've had some time to think about. Yeah.
No, I think through that rambling, you definitely said some very sort of insightful things, like the last part about finding your people and
Mhm.
how you can, you could try to find the flip side yourself, but if you have other people with you, that journey of finding it together, I think is really meaningful too.
For
And I'm
sure.
wondering if, especially with the Diabetes Hope Foundation, the Hope Connects mentorship program, if you have any experience from there or even other communities that you want to plug, feel free to.
Mhm.
How you've sort of helped other people find the flip side, I guess, is the question.
For sure. Yeah, so I do want to talk about my mentor. That was just like, do I name drop? But I will. Rav was my first, I guess, entry. After kind of just I was a COVID scholarship recipient. And I remember just sitting in front of the camera and clapping for everyone, muted, dressing up a bit. But I didn't really understand what I was getting myself into or what I had applied for, and how big kind of the community was until I think Rav kind of reached out as my mentor in 2021, right before I went into uni. And I really, that first year of getting to know Rav, and building that connection was great. But also after that year, as I became a mentor as well, I like kept going back and it was almost like, you know, longtime friends. And so that was really nice where it wasn't just a mentor mentee thing. It was just like, oh my goodness, Rav, my day sucked. It was, I had an assignment due today, or I have a final tomorrow, or I have this moral dilemma. And I find I really like to be Like I love when I'm cared for, and Rob is always just so sweet. It's always like when she reaches out to me or she's like, "Oh my goodness, my baby." And I'm just like, "Yes, I am looking for some care." And she will always do that for you. She will always be so supportive. And but also real. So I know that I'm not getting, very surface level insight, or she's actually thinking about it. And that connection from the first year and just over the past 3, 4 years, she's gotten to know me, I've gotten to know her. So, and it helps that we're both South Asian and we both have that, we were both diagnosed young. So that kind of root connection has also brought me a lot of joy. Especially when, maybe my parents and my family don't get it. I do have Rob and she gets it. And then also I will plug in the Discord is amazing. It is so nice to have so many people be like, it is partly anonymous. Like you're not seeing someone's face, you don't know how much energy they have, but we're all, and I love to be very real and sometimes kind of morbid with, the reality of T1D and everything right now, but it is always just so well received. You can support people, but you can also just, have a laugh together. T1D connects, and it really does connect so many people. I've had people tell me that, oh my gosh, you're so funny, and I'm just like, really? That's so nice. I'm glad I can make you laugh because you made me laugh too. We connect on like, movies or, a stubborn high, couple of BGs or a couple of really, hot days where it's just like what are people doing to like cool off? So, or if you're scarring because of your sites, what are some good scar creams? Or, what's a nice, my medical alert band is really, really old. How do I get a new one? Or what's some prettier ones? So lots of opportunities, lots of really nice people. I love to be real on there, and I hope that people, because I feel like that's how you normalize it as well, the experiences you have with diabetes. If you don't talk about it, then people don't realize how much it is. People just are like, oh, she has diabetes, moving on next. And that's nice sometimes, but it's also like, I want people to understand it's not like I said, everyone's dealing with something, and you don't get to just belittle their experiences like that. You don't understand until you understand to a certain extent. But yeah, I feel like those platforms and communities really do help.
For sure, and thank you for highlighting them. I have to also add that if you don't know about, the Discord or Hope Connects program, or even the scholarship program, please visit diabeteshopefoundation.com just to learn more about all of the amazing things that DHF does offer. And there's one more thing, actually. I know that you're very involved on campus at your university. Could you speak to sort of that club experience and what you've gotten out of that?
Yeah, I am. So this is my second year that I'm going to be a co-president for the Diabetes Awareness Society at U of T Scarborough. And it is we're actually in our fourth year, and it has really grown, and I'm so glad I get to be a part of that. I feel like the club started off by, it was founded by someone really, really passionate about diabetes awareness, and about, healthy living and exercise and how you can take steps to kind of not only prevent kind of diabetes later on, but also kind of manage it. And I feel like I've been really grateful to work with some great people on kind of exacerbating or kind of furthering the empathy side of it, the real kind of, experience with type 1 diabetes or even type 2 diabetes sides of it. So in the past, I'd say year or two, I've really been kind of focused on showing, what a day-to-day life with diabetes looks like, or all these, 40 plus factors that go into diabetes management or that influence your BGs from day to day. And I'm so glad, like, our team this year as well, we have some really passionate people. And it's always about, like, teaching them something new and always myth busting. It always does get me when people don't know the difference between calories and carbs. And also, there are still type people who don't know the difference between type 1 and type 2. So there's a couple of things that I, for my own um purpose, but also I know to the purpose of other T1Ds and T2Ds, especially. And we talk about LADA and MODY. So many different types of diabetes now as well, insulin resistance. And I'm so glad we get to do that through this club at UTSC. Um, yeah, I feel like it's a great way to, once again, myth bust, but also get to show people that, you know what, we're student leaders with and without diabetes, but who are passionate about it. And yeah, just showing more into kind of, you know, day in the life, or if you were to put yourself in their shoes, management, empowerment, all of
For sure. And even meeting people who are, passionate about the same things that you are and being able to carry that baggage together, I think makes it a little bit lighter, alluding to that really good sort of visual that you had about carrying that weight.
that.
Um, and the sort of, as we're coming to the end of the podcast episode, I keep hearing the phrase, diabetes doesn't define me, and it gets thrown out around a lot.
Mhm.
And I feel like I'm conflicted about it because it feels empowering, but at the same time, it's a little bit dismissive, maybe, of how deeply diabetes affects us. So I'm curious about how that phrase, diabetes doesn't define me, lands for you.
For sure. I think I will say in short, and then I'll expand, but it does and it doesn't, and that's okay. Yeah, I really like how you put it. It is both ends. It does become dismissive sometimes, and it is, empowering at other times. Just pulling on my own experiences, an aspect to a really supportive family was that they always told me, diabetes doesn't define you. It's just another part of you. And growing up, I really took that to mean, I can, they mentioned as well, you can do anything with diabetes. And I've seen some really powerful individuals and really, we're just, if you take away the diabetes, your personality is still there. It might have made you stronger, but a really smart person is not going to be less smart with diabetes. Or we all, to mean that, we're all, I guess there's a saying where the five fingers on your hand are all different. So it's like that. Everyone has their strengths and their flaws. And I think that for me, that took root in the sense that, I can do everything, I can do anything. I don't really have to deal with the burdens of diabetes, period. And then growing up, that did help my self-esteem. But growing up when high school and then especially university, kind of that transition, I realized, you know what? Those 180 plus decisions I'm making in my day-to-day life is really getting to me. It is not all, sunshine, rainbows, it's not easy. It doesn't I mean, you get used to it, but there's also weeks, maybe months where it is harder than ever. So definitely saying that diabetes doesn't define me, I feel like at those times can become very dismissive that, you know what, it's a huge part of me. Like when I am writing my exam, I'm writing in the test center with accommodations because I can't use my phone to check my blood sugar in the regular test center. Or I'm going low, I need a break. I am like shaky and I'm blurry. So you do need those accommodations, and you have to see it as like, it's just it's an aspect of diabetes that is very real, and it shouldn't, decrease how you see yourself. But I feel like, the idea that, oh no, diabetes isn't a big deal, it can almost perpetuate the idea that, it shouldn't have a big impact on your life. And when it does, then you kind of step back and think, what is going on or what is happening to me? And I feel like just being diagnosed from a very young age too, it's so different to people who have, experienced or have very real memories of like life without diabetes. So with that as well, you can't just say, diabetes doesn't define you when you have, very like different experiences before and after you get diagnosed. So long story short, it does and it doesn't, and you kind of have to support yourself through either. My family, they try to keep me very chipper and very, chin up, very positive. So when I do get down, they're kind of confused if like, it's just another part of your life. You've had it for so long. Why are you down about diabetes at this point in time? And so at that time, I kind of just I sometimes I try to kind of help them understand. My dad, he recently became pre-diabetic and he experienced some, fluctuations and he didn't feel great. Obviously, you don't feel great when you have a high or low. But after that, he kind of understood a little bit more. But that goes to show that you really can't understand until you experience it yourself. So you really have to pick and choose kind of your battles where you can sometimes try and explain it that, imagine feeling really shaky, imagine feeling really blurry, your heart is racing and you just want to eat everything in the fridge. How would you deal with that? And some people just can't understand, and you don't always have to do something about it. Um, yeah, especially pulling in that South Asian aspect as well. My family, they're like my extended family. They're like sometimes I get the pity aspect, or like I maybe I won't call it pity, but just like, oh my goodness, there's so much more I didn't know, and I always appreciate that. But you always, there will always be so much that people don't know. So the definitions of diabetes is very different from person to person, from, people who have lived experience for people who know someone who has lived experience. So you just have to kind of move on. You just have to give yourself a sad day, a bad day, a crying day. You have to reach out to people, I reach out to Rav or I reach out to my endo if things are going really, really badly. So you just kind of have to realize that, it is an experience. It is difficult. It doesn't make you less. You don't have to keep, being almost toxically positive, but you can't always just be like, oh my gosh. For me, it's like I don't want to be down in the dumps for too long about it. And you have to, life goes on, and unfortunately, you can't sit in your bed with a tub of ice cream, and then you have to bolus for it too. So, how long are you gonna do that? But yeah, it's always a balance game, I feel like.
I totally hear you. I love the toxically positive because sometimes I feel like you can't always be happy through things, but that's okay because life is a roller coaster. There's ups, there's downs, there's loops, everything is
Exactly.
in there.
There's
Um,
highs and low blood sugars. I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. I've learned so much from you in this episode, but like as we're coming to the end, if you had to leave the listeners with one takeaway, what would it be?
Yeah, I'd say just pulling on what we just talked about, I'd say that, realize that diabetes doesn't necessarily get easier, even if you are more used to it. It is a big responsibility having to take on the role of your pancreas. Most people don't know what their pancreas does, and to have to kind of embody an organ that's inside of you 24/7, you don't get breaks from that. And it can just be really overwhelming for, if you have diabetes or if you know someone who has diabetes. So I hope that people understand, it is a responsibility, and the people or if you do have, T1D, T2D, you are a warrior and you are strong and you are a superhero. It doesn't, if you have diabetes, it's not something to kind of dismiss, but it also doesn't lessen your worth. Your worth comes from how you react to life, not the conditions you have. Because once again, everyone has something, everyone has some type of character flaw or some type of, experience that, brings them down once in a while. So my, condition is just, and there's so many words attached to that, condition, illness, um, a disease, some people call it, or whatever it is very real. It is 24/7, and I hope you, take the time to figure out how you can support them. But also just it helps a lot to just be there and be like, I see you. that you ask them, how you can help them, and you always give worth to what deserves worth, because it is a lot. So I think, therefore, I am kind of vibes. You are good enough just by existing, no matter you have diabetes or not. And if you do have diabetes, we are, T1D babes. Like, we are amazing. So you just have to kind of tell yourself that over and over, add it to your daily affirmations. Yeah.
Well, I see you, Tasfia, and I think you made a lot of people feel seen today. So thank you for sharing your story and really like giving us insight into your culture, your family, and to our listeners. Please remember that flip side, and it's yours to discover.
All right, guys, that's all for today. We'll see you next time on Diabuddy Dialogue. Whoever you are and wherever you're tuning in from, you've got a Diabuddy here.